I was working with an electronics manufacturer in Pennsylvania. They wanted my help to reduce the time it took to generate a test report for equipment that they received from the field that had to be tested in their electronics testing lab. Now, I took a Gemba walk with my sponsor through that lab, and I saw tons of clutter and a general lack of organization, and I was confident that we would be able to cut that time of test generation in half with the proper team and the proper approach. Well, my sponsor agreed with me, and we put together a team, and I developed a 5S Kaizen event to help them in their testing lab. Now, George was the owner of the testing lab, and he was the one that used it 98% of the time. The week before the Kaizen event, George took it upon himself to clean up the lab to start the improvements. Now, my sponsor was livid. He couldn't believe George had done that and thought that this would scuttle the improvement opportunities for our Kaizen event. Walking through the lab, I could see that not much really had changed, and that basically George had probably given us a 2 to 4 hour head start on our work. So I tried to reassure my sponsor, but he wasn't 100% convinced. But I said, trust me, we're going to be fine. So day one of the Kaizen event, after training the team in a number of lean principles and specifically in how 5S can improve safety and productivity, we took a Gemba walk of the testing lab. Now, team members with eyes now open to new ways of thinking took tremendous amounts of notes and generated just dozens and dozens of ideas to improve the space. Our goal was not only to improve the testing time, but we wanted to improve the safety, the productivity, and certainly the flow of materials through that lab. After we generated the ideas, we prioritized them, and then we set to work on our 5S journey. On that first day and a little bit into the second day, we must have removed 75 to 90% of the materials and items in the lab, from the very tiniest pieces of pieces and parts to the largest of equipment. What we learned was that there was one critical piece of equipment in the lab that every electronics unit that had to be tested had to go through. So in day one, it was kind of hidden through all the clutter, but by the middle of day two, you could see it and you could get to it, and materials and equipment could go through it much easier. So we decided to optimize everything in the lab to that critical piece of equipment. Now, everything started to look just wonderful, and the clutter was gone, and things were labeled, and everything just looked great. And the team was pretty proud of themselves, and they were going to do some even better looking framing and labeling and marking and so on. And I realized that that really wasn't going to get any further improvement for them. And we had about 4 good hours of work available to us. So I decided to teach them another technique to see how the flow in the lab really was. It's called spaghetti diagram. So what happens essentially is you follow the travel of the worker as he or she does their work with a pen on a piece of paper, and if they go back and forth, the pen on paper makes these lines that look pretty much like spaghetti at the end. So we asked George to demonstrate what happens when a piece of electronics equipment comes into the lab to be tested and through the whole process of testing. So George says, well, the first piece of equipment, when it comes in at the receiving dock. Should I go to the receiving dock? And we said, yes, go to the receiving dock. We'll draw a picture of that. We will follow your travel. So George basically took us through the 14 key process steps for testing anything that comes into the lab. And when we looked at the spaghetti on the paper, we realized that there was great opportunity to make the flow through the lab even better with just 2 or 3 very, very simple moves. The team was amazed because they thought they had already made the improvements necessary to cut the time in half. And I believe they had, but this was another level breakthrough that we could create. So with very minimal changes, we rearranged a couple things around in the lab based on the spaghetti diagrams. Then we had George demonstrate again with the new arrangement, and the team was amazed as most of the spaghetti or extra lines of travel had been eliminated. Now, The team was a believer, and George became a believer as well. And when the session was over, we got reports from time to time how George continued to make improvements in his lab. The best thing, besides George being a believer, is the customer saw a significant reduction in time and got the critical results they needed much sooner than they ever had before. I hope this story provided you with some inspiration to revisit your own processes. I have a lot more I'd like to share. Head over to pi-partners.com to learn how I can help. And check back from time to time for more Kaizen stories.